So hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, that is good.
I'm going to describe some results generated by the Data Federation Consortium. This is a project sponsored by the National Science Foundation with the intent of establishing national scale data infrastructure through the Federation of Existing Data Management Systems. When we look at the wide variety of applications that are in use, we find groups that are trying to share data, publish data, process data, distribute data, and preserve data. For each of those applications, the DFC put together a set of policies to test whether or not we could automate management of each of those types of environments. The most difficult environment to implement has been a trustworthy repository. This is a repository about which you can make assertions and prove that you're managing the data correctly, that you haven't introduced errors, that everything continues to work. If we build a trustworthy repository for preservation, then the requirements become even more stringent. In this paper, Trustworthy Policies for Distributed Repositories, published in Morgan and Claypool, we presented an implementation of a trustworthy repository for a preservation environment. The approach we took was to state that preservation is communication with the future. We're packaging data, information, and knowledge and sending it into the future for use on new technologies, on systems we have no idea how they're going to work. So in order for this to be feasible, we had to rely upon iRODS to provide the infrastructure independence. Every time a new technology comes along, we plug it into the iRODS infrastructure, and we can now manage our data, information, and knowledge transparently on the new technologies. But if preservation is communication, it also implies we have to be able to respond to questions that someone in the future is going to ask. To make that possible, we have to provide a set of proxies that can respond to the questions that might be asked about our archival environment. Fortunately, we get to control what questions we're willing to respond to. We don't have to respond to everything, but there are a minimal set of questions we should be able to answer. Basically, we should be able to answer any question about an assertion we've made about our preservation environment. For the National Archives and Records Administration in the US, the basic assertions are about authenticity. Are the records what we claim them to be? Integrity, have they been compromised? Chain of custody, who's managed them? And original arrangement. For the National Archives, all records are members of a record series. So one challenge then is, are there additional assertions that need to be made that we have to be able to respond to in the future through a set of iRODS policies? So let's see. I got a switch. There we go. Fortunately, the ISO 16363 standard established in 2012 defines what is now an acceptable set of assertions that need to be satisfied by a trustworthy environment. In this standard, there are 113 different tasks that should be done. Those tasks end up requiring generation of 47 management documents. These are documents that are generated externally, such as documents about mission statements, documents about sustainability, about budgeting, etc. But there are also 33 generated reports we should be able to create automatically about the status of the environment, how things are operating, what's been done. When we took each of these 113 tasks, we came up with an associated iRODS policy that would either set up the parameters required for the task, apply the task to the collection, or allow us to audit the results of executing the task. When we implemented the policies, we ended up with 10 documents that describe how we manage all of the different reports. We have to version them, store them, name them, organize them, periodically review them, etc. We ended up with 8 policies that set repository parameters. How are the data organized? What staff are allowed to use the system? We had to set up explicit preservation attributes, so 7 policies to do that. Policies that audited all the preservation actions, 23 of them. Policies that implemented the preservation operations that we're auditing, there were 30 of those, and policies that actually managed the infrastructure. So the result of this effort is that we ended up with a set of 81 iRODS policies that use 23 policy functions that depended upon 15 global variables that we could modify and reset our entire environment by changing the global variable, and then the 42 preservation attributes that were needed for all of the preservation operations. So these included attributes ranging from metadata required for a submission information package to metadata required about access controls. Effectively, ISO 16363 requires you to log every external action, version every report that's generated, and audit every internal operation. These policies have been put into GitHub, and they're available under this ISO rules subdirectory. One of the interesting results from this is that we looked at NSF data management plans. This is so the National Science Foundation, each directorate has a different set of management plans. From those, you can aggregate roughly 38 different tasks that should be done. We were able to map each of those 38 tasks to one of the tasks in the ISO 16363 standard. So this standard appears to be a good representation of the policies that are needed to manage data in a trustworthy environment. They're sufficient for data management plans, for digital libraries, for data distribution. You'll have to add some additional policies to control that. So I welcome any questions.
So we have a cube. It's hard to explain. We have a cube with a microphone attached. All right. So does anybody have any questions for Reagan? Except Mike Conway. Okay. All right. Here you go.
It looks like Nirav Merchant is joining, so he'll be giving the next.
That's right. So we have a question over here from Tan. I'm not sure if the camera can see him over in the right corner. Let's see. Is that working? Can you wave? Yes?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Reagan, for this talk. It's a very interesting talk. The OIS model, is there, if when you implement it in policies in iRODS, would that set a certain structure definition for how you go about with collections and sub-collections and the likes? Is there, did you come across a best practice to implement that, or is it, how do the policies take that into consideration? For instance, for an AIP, archiving information package.
Regan, can you hear that? I'm afraid we might have been muted. Regan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Ton, can you try that one more time?
Ooh, okay, it was a long question.
Regan, can you hear Ton?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So the OIS reference model, which relates to the ISO standard, right? How did you consider to implement that? Does it imply a certain structure within iRODS to implement it in terms of collections and sub-collections, for instance, for the archival information packages?
Okay, the ISO 16363 standard is built explicitly on top of the OIS standard. So it deals with problems related to submission information packages, archival information packages, dissemination information packages, and it uses the same language for representation information, knowledge communities, etc. So the policies we had to implement effectively were policies from OASIS.
And do they require a certain collection structure by your knowledge?
So we set up the global variables to allow you to specify the collection arrangement you wanted to impose. So I came up with one that allowed me to manage all the different types of documents, whether they're internally generated, externally generated, whether they're reports, whether they're manifests, log files. So there's a suggested structure, but you could change the environment variables to create a different one.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hey, Regan, I hope everything is okay in Chapel Hill. I made a similar comment, I think, last year. So a lot of the emphasis right now is rightly on things like storage, the scalability of the system, high availability, and sort of these sort of critical concerns. And above that, we start having, I think, the luxury to start thinking about how to apply iRODS tools to things like trusted preservation and data management plans. But I think the other aspect is we have iRODS sort of in the game now for managing research data, even coming off of instruments and sensors. But to start thinking about the entire life cycle of research data and how to think about iRODS and policies in relation to that data all the way through to publication or even disposal. Is that a question?
So I have my interpretation of the question. One of our requirements for the National Science Foundation is to demonstrate how we broaden the impact of our collections, make them accessible to a larger number of people. And basically, that requires us to take tacit knowledge we have about our collection and make it explicit. So somebody else who doesn't have the tacit knowledge can correctly and usefully interact with the collection. So we do that through writing policies that do that transformation from tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. So these could be procedures you can run to change the format of a file, to addition of descriptive metadata, etc. So in the process of trying to make a collection accessible to a large number of people, you have to worry about trustworthiness, about storage and performance, but you also have to worry about whether the system provides enough knowledge that the next group of people can interact with it.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions? We've got Nirav, I think, ready. Nirav, can we hear you? Thank you, Regan. Maybe we can clap for Regan.
Thank you.